It's a pleasure to be here today, and I would like to say a big thank you to the Africa Center for Entrepreneurship and Youth Empowerment for putting this together, especially in Professor George Ayittey's alma mater. I believe he came here as a student and also taught here. Professor Ayittey lived an exemplary life and inspired so many of us, including myself. And I would like to say also a big thank you to Emmanuel and his team for thinking about this and making sure that we immortalize Professor George Ayittey. Today we embark on a journey of remembrance. We are honoring a titan whose legacy echoes the plains and mountains of our continent, and his name is George Ayittey. As I take the stage, it reminds me of my first encounter with Professor Ayittey's work. This was in 2010 as a restless undergraduate in a Nigerian university. I was curious about the challenges that my country was facing, just as your country is facing quite a number of challenges as well, similar. And I stumbled on the profound insights contained in Professor Ayittey's masterpiece, the book called Africa Unchained. I invite you to take a look at it. But like puzzle pieces, fitting into place, the arguments that George Ayittey made explained some of the questions that I had and provided insights into them. And a lot of this, and exploring other thinkers such as Frederick Bastiat, these ideas led to me and a few friends establishing a youth movement committed to propagating the principles of individual and economic freedom across the continent of Africa. But fast forward to 2013, and I find myself meeting Professor in person and sharing a panel with such a remarkable thinker. In his presence, you could almost touch the wisdom coming from him. He emanated, this passion about Africa. And for those of you who are new to Professor Ayittey's work, I invite you to go to YouTube and just search for George Ayittey and look at his TED Talk or watch his interviews. And you would understand exactly what I'm saying, because he was very fiery. You could sense the anger and the fact that he was unhappy about the status of our continent and wanted you and I and everyone to sort of try to make change. Professor Ayittey was not merely an academic. He was a torchbearer for freedom and a relentless challenger of oppression. He was very fiery. He wasn't just a theorist. He was someone who stood and fought and challenged the government and ensured that, he was not silent. And he thought that you and I and himself could change the continent. He consistently emphasized the narrative of Africa before colonialism. Africa where laws, rights, trade, and commerce thrived, and he wanted a future where we as Africans could be proud of ourselves and proud of the values that we carry and proud of our history. Today we pay homage to George Ayittey for being an audacious visionary, and we reaffirm our commitment to empowering young Africans and ensuring that his work gets far and wide. In a few minutes, we would explore the depths of Professor Ayittey's vision, his monumental contributions to freedom for all Africans and for all humans, and his profound impact on the African youth. This is not just a tribute to George Ayittey, it's a call to action, urging us to rise, challenge the status quo, and innovate and make sure that we find the change that we want. Professor spoke very assertively about the adoption of free markets, and he said that this were a means to economic development. He urged us to hold our leaders accountable, and by leaders I mean like the politicians. And he believed that this was an important tenet of pre-colonial African societies. And there's a lot of evidence to buttress that. One of his key pillars in his belief system on how Africa could become better was the strength of our traditional African institutions. And Dr. Palmer recently, on his last speech, talked about Indigenous African Institutions, which is a book that George Ayittey wrote. And in this book, he argues eloquently about the role of the extended family, about the village councils. You have those in Ghana, we have those in Nigeria. We have many societies across Africa have similar structures where they have village councils, people who advise, presidents and, kings, or chiefs, as you may call them in Ghana of old. And he saw that, we could look to our history and find examples that we can continue to modernize and continue to utilize rather than borrow hook, line, and sinker structures and systems from outside of Africa that have proven over time not to work for us. In another book, which is very eye-opening, called Africa in Chaos, Professor Ayittey took us on a journey through history, revealing the factors that contributed to Africa's current state. It was a call to arms and a wake-up call, and he urged us to try to make our future better. He had a very strong belief in democracy. And if you find his book, Defeating Dictators, you'd understand what I mean. He talked about fighting tyranny in Africa and around the world. And his convictions were that these principles, the principles of democracy, structured around our local realities and our history, is the pathway for us to make meaningful change in our respective communities. Professor Ayittey was not just a theorist, but an active participant in shaping minds. His role in Students for Liberty, the organization that I work for, was very instrumental. As a member of our advisory board, he provided guidance, wisdom, and most importantly, inspiration. He helped us shape and deliver an online course called Liberty in Africa, which is also not free, but at 0 CDs, available to anyone who is interested in learning more about freedom across the continent. And from African perspectives, we have people like Kofi Bentil as instructors in that online course, and it was led by George Ayittey himself. So I invite you to Google Liberty in Africa on the Students for Liberty website, and you'd find access to that. Professor Ayittey's commitment was recognized, not just by Students for Liberty, where he was the Alumni of the Year in 2014, but it was also recognized as and received the Kwame Nkrumah Prize for Distinguished African Leadership, and many, many, many more recognitions before he left us. In George Ayittey, we saw a reflection of Africa, what Africa could be, which is a continent of prosperity, freedom, and growth. And he showed us that we are not just inheritors of our past, but we are shapers of our future. He advises us to take charge of our lives, and this has been very helpful for us, and me and many other young people that he fondly called the cheetah generation. So if you've heard that term, the cheetah generation, and you consider yourself to be part of the cheetah generation, that term was coined by Professor Ayittey. As we spread across the continent, young people, you, me, everyone who considers themselves to be part of the cheetah generation, he increasingly every single time encouraged us to take charge and make sure that we hold our government accountable. From Addis Ababa to Zanzibar, or from Lagos to Johannesburg or Accra, his ideas continue to thrive and are echoed by vibrant young people who are committed to fostering freedom and prosperity on our respective continents. So we've spoken a lot about George Ayittey's life and what he did and how he inspired people. But what exactly did he believe in? What are the tenets that Professor spent so many years trying to speak to people about and write books about and give lectures about? So I've summarized like a crux of a lot of his arguments and there are a lot of them. I encourage you to explore his work in a few bullet points. George Ayittey believed in the adoption of a free market system across the continent. And he believed that this was very essential if we wanted to see trade and economic growth. He argued that these policies will create a much more level playing ground for businesses, both domestic and international and foreign, and would encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. And we can see the importance of trade across the continent and around the world. He believed that free market policies would help to reduce corruption and rent seeking. And that's a very important thing, because if we do not address corruption, both in Nigeria or Ghana or whatever part of Africa, the cost of corruption goes deeper than what you and I face. It's our children and our children's children that have to pay for this. He was a firm believer in promotion of democracy, and that democracy was essential for political stability. And he argued that democracy would give Africans a voice in the decision-making process. He believed that democracy would help promote economic development by creating a more stable environment for businesses to thrive and for investments to come into the country, whether from domestic sources or from foreign sources. He argued that we must adopt democracy to fit our unique circumstances, and that as Africans we should look to traditional modes of social ordering and make sure our democracies fit our social realities. He argued that we must hold our leaders accountable, and that African leaders need to be held for every single action that they make. So therefore, the rule of law is very important for us to have. He believed in the economic empowerment of women. As Dr. Palmer mentioned, he considered women to be the backbone of the economy. And Ayittey believed that women play a vital role in Africa's development, and that they need to be left alone. Excessive government regulation, trying to go after small businesses, that's not the way to go. He believed in the use of traditional institutions. Both in Nigeria or in Ghana, whatever part of Africa that you are, there are examples of traditional African institutions that exist. And he believed that it's important for us to modernize these systems and encourage the adoption of them. And he believed in regional integration. Professor Ayittey believed that Africa needed to integrate more with its neighbors in order to promote economic development. And he argued that this would create a larger market. And with larger markets, you have a lot more competition. And with competition, you have a lot more innovation and you have growth. Lastly, Professor Ayittey believed in the youth. He believed that the young people will play a vital role in Africa's development. And he argued that youth were the most dynamic and innovative parts of Africa's population, and that they had the potential to lead Africa to a better future. The cheetah generation, as they called us, is the solution to Africa's positive future. He believed that we needed to be educated, and we also needed to be empowered in order for us to make effective change in our respective societies. And he was particularly concerned about the high levels of youth unemployment in Africa, and he called on young people to take entrepreneurial action and take charge of our lives. I think it's important for us to make it a responsibility. We have pride and determination to make sure that his vision for free trade across the continent of Africa, we see that in our lifetime. He's always said that Africa is poor because she's not free, and he considers that the key to freedom across the continent of Africa lies in the cheetah generation, lies in me and you. Thank you very much.